Ooh. Uh, there you go. Ah, no. I lost it. Oh, hold on a second. There we go. Good to see you all. Hello, ladies. Venerable Felix Morella y Morales. Huh?
Felix Melendez.
No, not Felix Melendez. Felix Varela. I turned the page. All right. Varela. Okay, Mr. Melendez. Yeah, Felix Melendez. It's the name of my guardian angel, too. Felix. St. Felix Bellois. Maybe one day there'll be a St. Felix Melendez. Never know.
What's you?
You can hope. Well, Mr. Gaines.
Yo.
Felix Varela was born in Havana, Cuba. You can see his dates here. 1788 until 1853. 1853. Okay. Cuba at the time was still part of the Spanish Empire. And he grew up there, went to school there, was ordained a priest there. And he was a smart guy. You know, he taught in the seminary. He taught courses on philosophy, but he also taught the natural sciences like physics and chemistry. I don't know why they were teaching the priests chemistry in the seminary. I don't want to blow stuff up. I don't know. What are they doing? Teaching chemistry. I don't know. Anyways, nevertheless, he was a smart guy. So he knew the natural sciences. He was politically active. He was, an agitator against slavery, which was still legal in the Spanish Empire at the time. So he was, campaigned against that. He also was in favor of Cuba becoming independent from the Spanish Empire, which didn't make him very well loved by government officials. And eventually he was sentenced to death. There was a death warrant out on him for his political views. So that's how he got to us, both literally and figuratively, Mr. Saunders. He fled to New York City. Eventually, he ended up in New York City, basically. He went somewhere else first, but he ended up in the United States in New York City, where he was safe, and he served as a priest. He served the Spanish community in New York City. He also founded El Habanero, which was the first Spanish language newspaper in the country at the time. First Spanish language newspaper in the country. He was appointed Vicar General of the Diocese of New York, which meant he was like second in charge after the bishop. So that's pretty powerful. Was a pretty powerful position for him to have. Okay, and I'm assuming he became a naturalized citizen somewhere along the way. He wasn't born here, but he did come and live here. So I'm assuming he was naturalized. So that's good enough for me. Anyways, he died in America, so we've got his bones, and possession is 9/10 of the law. So we got him. So I'll say he's an American. Anyways, he died naturally. He got asthma in his later life, and he retired from being a priest. He's just a good holy man. Nothing apparently that spectacular. And then he just died down in Florida. Actually, retired down. Who doesn't retire to Florida? Even back then in the 1800s. Anyways. Well, he had lived there as a child for a few years, I think. But anyways, so that's where he died. Now he's venerable. So he's Venerable Felix, and I ask him for his prayers for us in this class. Yes. See. Where did we stop? Religious studies, right? How to study religion. And what does that have to do with religion and violence? Thinking about what was I thinking about? Maybe it'll come back to me. Okay. Something to do with the course that I can mention, but I don't remember what it wanted to mention. Where are we here? How is religion studied? There we go. Oh yeah, that's what I was thinking of. All right, but I don't know if it really relates. Okay, the Enlightenment, yes. Oh, okay. I'm talking about the Enlightenment influences on religious studies. And I'll try as I'm going through these things to relate them also, to our question of what does it have to do with religion and violence? How does it help us or push us anywhere near forward and understanding violence and its connection with religion? So, religious studies, as I said, with the Enlightenment, especially the benefits that people could see from the natural sciences, everyone wanted to be scientific. Okay, and if any of you study your whatever field you're in, whether it's social work or business, education, probably you'll notice that the modern form of your field came into existence sometime in the 1800s, where someone wanted to kind of apply science in a broad manner of speaking to the field. So the science of religion, we want to apply the tools and the strategies and the assumptions of the natural sciences to studying something. The humanities. So you have anthropology start appearing, psychology, the human mind. Not that people hadn't done these things before, but they hadn't done them in a properly scientific way with testing and stuff like that. So there were, some of the assumptions of Enlightenment science, not all of which are valid, I think, but they're there. Were taken over into religious studies. The first of these would be materialism, that the assumption is there is no supernatural reality. Remember, the sacred is a perception that we have. We perceive the holy. But the underlying assumption in that definition is that it really ain't there. We think it's there. We think there are spirits in the bushes, or there's a God in his heaven. But it really isn't. That's the assumption of religious studies. Materialism. All reality is composed really of physical matter. And materia in Latin means simply stuff. But as in food stuff. Okay? Things that you eat. Okay? But in an extended, broader sense, it can have the meaning of a cause or a source of something. Okay? We'll talk about the matter, Mr. Gracie, right? Okay? I could be referring to food stuff, but I'm not. Talking about the source. We'll talk of what I'm using it in the cause or the source of whatever we're going to talk about. The subject of our discourse. Materia. So that's one of the assumptions that's taken over from the natural sciences. You're not assuming that there's a God behind things. Again, remember with the Enlightenment, you're using human reason and testing your experience, empiricism, to come to your conclusions. You're not relying on religious texts or tradition or whatever that people tell you is the reason. Sometimes, if you read some of the early scientists, even some of the great geniuses like Isaac Newton, when they get to points of parts of the world that even Newton couldn't explain, he's the guy who talked about gravity and came up with laws of physics and stuff like that as an Englishman. But there were points where even he had to say, I can't explain this, so this must be God. Even as a scientist, So he wasn't a materialist, but he did believe in the supernatural. But yeah, so you still find remnants of this kind of supernaturalist view. When we can't explain it, it's God. Whereas the modern science kind of goes the other direction, that it never can be a God, even when we find something really weird that points to something ultimate. But so the world is composed of physical matter. That's all it is. That's the assumption. Another assumption is that there's only the natural material world, that material world, because you could still have physical matter. You could have physical matter and still have the supernatural, because certain religions like Hinduism, it's not impossible. Well, I shouldn't say it's not impossible. It's part of the religion that, there is like spiritual matter. The whole world kind of emerges out of a divine stuff, materia, and everything emerges out of it. The gods, the planets, and eventually us humans as well. But it is a very materialistic view of the supernatural. Not all religions are spiritualists in that way. That it's all invisible spirit, not material, like in Christianity or Judaism or Islam. For some, it is very material. Certainly, the pagan religion, a lot of pagan religions, it's very material. I mean, the gods were real for the Greeks and Romans. You could touch them and see them. They lived somewhere. Usually, gods live in the mountains for some reason. Well, I guess because they're superior, so they have to be high up. They have beards, they have feasts, so they have to eat, they have sex, they do all sorts of physical things. But naturalism says that there is no supernatural, so it kind of voids that. That's not even possible. Only the natural material world. The material world is what is natural, and there's nothing super or above it or apart from it. It's the only adequate source of explanation for explaining all phenomena. All phenomena. Yes. What position do you play? You're a catcher? Oh, really? Oh, that's interesting.
I've been judged.
No. It's interesting. I thought my prejudice was I thought you would have been a pitcher, just from your body shape. Catchers are usually stocky and short. No, interesting. You're gonna have bad knees though eventually, when you.
I already do.
Oh, you do, yeah. It's like okay, interesting. So naturalism. And based on the natural, we even call them that. We call them the natural sciences. And based on all of the successes that the natural sciences had back then and also have now, okay, that seemed to be correct. All phenomena can really be judged and explained by a naturalist approach. We look for, and I think that's this. Kelowna, it's kind of natural, yeah. Even religious people look for natural excuses. Okay, we don't necessarily think it's immediately God or something. If something weird happens, you wonder what's causing that. You look for what it is. You physically look for it. You don't just say, "Well, God did that." Guy showed me a card in his hand, or a guy shows me his hand, and then all of a sudden, a card appears in his hand. You see a little kid. Even little kids will start looking around. Or if you show them, I have a ball here in one hand, and I put it in here in this hand, and it's not there, and they're looking at the other hand. Kids aren't dumb. They kind of, and then you open that, and there's no ball there either. Ooh, spooky. That's when you freak them out. But we do just naturally seem to gravitate towards natural explanations. We don't immediately say, "Oh, that's magic. That's real." You can, by your own will, make this ball in your hand disappear from your hand to whatever. So naskor, naturalism, nature is things that are born. That's just all it means, in case you're wondering. Naskor, to be born. So that's what nature is. We're born. Things are born. Basically, things are contingent. They come from something else. And, we come from something else, but plants are born from seeds and trees as well. And other animals are born. Empiricism is a third assumption. Experience. We rely on our personal observation and experimentation for knowledge. That's the best way to gain knowledge. Personally, to see something happen, to experiment with it, to mess with it, to see if it happens the same way every time. What happens if we change the conditions? So empiria. Empiria, which means experience. That's all it means. Same thing. Empiricism. All right? We rely on our observation and experiment. We don't take it on authority. Someone said so. This happened. Even if someone says that it happened and they observed it, we want to observe it ourselves. Hence, testing. That's the very basis of the sciences, right? That someone has done something, Ms. Cook, and that others in other places should be able to reproduce it, right? It's the basis of natural science. It's reproducible. It's falsifiable. I can do the experiment and see you're wrong. Your results were wrong or different, right? In fact, that's one of the arguments against religion. It's not falsifiable. It's not. How do you disprove God? How do you disprove it? You can't put a God into a laboratory and test it. That's one of the problems with religion, some people say. It's based on claims that are non-falsifiable or not able to be shown to be wrong. Whereas the natural sciences give better knowledge because you can show them. There's that, you can test something and come up with different results. And so you say, well, something's wrong here, yes? We're not sure, yes? Maybe. How you doing, Mr. Dobson? What's going on? Nothing? True words, sir. True words. Bart? Moon? Yes, and Miss Krause. Be careful, Miss Krause. I don't want you to go all the way into the closet. Stay with me. Stay with me. I'm just... Anyways... But that can also be that has become a problem, though, even for the natural sciences. I mean, that was all well and good when science was in its infancy and people could do these things. It's nearly impossible to do that anymore. That's a huge problem in the natural sciences right now. It's been actually, I shouldn't say now, it's been going on for a few decades. They don't talk about it very much, but it's the verification issue because running experiments has become so complex. You have to have so many people involved, people involved in blind, control groups and all sorts of double blind groups. There's so many people involved, it takes so much money to run the experiments that no one else can reproduce them. So how do you know if the result, the essential plank, empiricism of modern science has now crumbled, has been taken away, not just by happenstance, because no one has the money or the resources to reproduce what this other people are doing. People are working they have universities behind them or government grants and millions of dollars in some cases. How do I compete with that if I'm just a lone scientist? I'm just teaching here at Gwynedd Mercy, but I want to check the results of some psychological study or some physics study, that was done out in Switzerland at CERN. Anyone know what CERN is? The Large Hadron Collider. Think things like it's a big circle, but it's like 5 miles long. 5 miles if you laid it out. It's huge. It's immense. Took billions of dollars to build. And all they're basically using it to crash atoms into each other, to break them apart so they can see what they're made of. Which is kind of cool, right? Well, yeah, they think it's cool. If you don't like science, then you're like, it's like being in this class, right, Ms. Rogers? It's like, they're peeking in to the smallest aspects of the universe. Well, I don't have billions of dollars and I don't have access to a huge collider. There are others in the world that are smaller. I don't have access to that. And I don't have the money to build it. So how do I reproduce any of the experiments that they're doing over there in Switzerland with this collider? You have to take the results on faith. It's becoming a big problem in the natural sciences. It's outgrown the experimentation has outgrown the possibilities of people reproducing it. So there is also actually a falsifiability problem that's going on in the natural sciences. Nevertheless, you do want to experience these things. You know, if you're an anthropologist, it stands to reason. Cultural anthropologist, you know, Clifford Geertz, right? We read his definition of religion. Hopefully, he went out and actually studied anthropoi, humans, right? He actually went somewhere and studied human beings. He didn't just read a book and then theorize about it, which is really kind of what the first anthropologists were doing. They're called, you know, armchair scholars. They would sit in their studies with their library of books and they would read about different cultures, and then they come up with these grandiose theories about human society or the development of culture. And what I remember, E.B. Tyler. Remember E.B. Tyler? Religion is the belief in spiritual beings. Anybody? No, Ms. Cook, you don't remember E.B. Tyler? The list of definitions that I gave you, and E.B. Tyler told you was the father of anthropology. Calgon, take me away. But the reason E.B. Tyler is the father of modern anthropology is because he actually went somewhere and wrote about his experiences. He kind of Tyler kind of stumbled into the field of anthropology, but he actually went somewhere. He was not an armchair scholar. He traveled somewhere, observed religious practices, and wrote about them, described them, and theorized about them. He experienced them. Evolutionism, when our buddy Charles Darwin comes along and comes up with his idea of evolutionism, that's a big one. That affects everything. Well, still affects everything. The theory that all living beings pass through stages of development from lower to higher forms. The word evolve simply X means out of Volvo. Have you ever seen a car? Volvo, it means I roll. I turn, you know. Someone is, I think it's a German company. They're a little bit cheeky with that name, you know. It's like when they had that car back in the 80s called the Citation. It's like, you know, little humor in that. Volvo, it turns out, or it rolls. So it rolls out of something else. So evolve, something comes out of something else. Okay? How does this occur? This is in the biology class, but you know, you have mutations in the gene. Now he didn't know about genes, not in the way we do. But you know, you have mutations in the genetic code that assert themselves, but also mainly for Darwin, it was adaptations. He started out by, you know, what got him first onto this. He didn't invent this idea. There were other people who theorized this before him. He actually, I don't know, you might, in some ways, you might say he kind of stole the idea from this other guy. Well, I shouldn't say he stole it. He has kind of had the idea, but there was this other guy he knew of who was working, I think in Indonesia. He was out in Indonesia and made the mistake of sending his results, his ideas to Darwin to get his thoughts on it. And Darwin was reading it. He's like, damn, this is what I've been thinking, you know, and he beat me to it, you know, he's going to get the credit. So Darwin quickly wrote up a paper that he gave to one of the scholarly societies, so at least he could say he had his out before this guy. So he gets all the credit for the idea. He didn't invent it, but he certainly did popularize it and you know, give it its finesse, explain, you know, how it happened. For him, you know, he kind of came to the idea of evolutionism when he was traveling around and came to a bunch of islands and saw different types of birds, the same kind of bird, but different types. Some of the birds on one island had the same bird, but some of them had really stubby, short beaks. But on another island, the same bird had a long beak. And on third island, I forget what they had. What was the difference? And he was like, just writing down, categorizing the different birds and what they looked like, and trying to figure out how this could be, because it was clearly the same species of bird, not three different ones. And he came up with the idea that, well, it must be that their beaks developed, adapted according to the situation. Like the ones with the long beaks were on an island where he noticed that, the seeds, I think, were maybe deeper in the plant or something like that, where you had to kind of like dig for them. So having a stubby beak wouldn't be helpful. You wouldn't be able to get at the seed. So it would be more helpful to have a longer beak, to pick the seed out. Whereas on the other island, the seeds, the ones with the stubby beaks will crush them. So maybe the seeds were harder. So if you had a longer beak, it wouldn't have been as
So,
it might have been harder to crush them than if you have the force of the stubby beak. And I forget about what the third birds were all about, but that was his idea. That's what kind of got him. Oh, this thing, it evolved. And he came on. The light bulb went off that things don't stay the same. They kind of develop and change their shape and form, and maybe that's happened to all life forms, right, Ms. Colonna? Yeah. Ah. Ah. This is what we came out of the jungle for. This. Anyways. Speaking of evolutionism. So yeah, so that was his idea. Um, so that was very influential. That offered an explanation for the variety that we saw in nature. Because of course, religion just said, well, it was all created by God, and boom, whammo, one fell swoop. God just created all the species and their diversity. And isn't it? And they kind of had an argument, because you could look at the various animals or insects and you could see, look, they're like perfectly formatted or formed for their environment, for what they need to do. Um, Darwin, a lot of people like Darwin's idea because it offered a non-theistic, a non-God explanation for how these animals and plants and insects and all sorts of other things could evolve these adaptations that were just perfect for where they were. So biological evolutionism, the evolution of life, the development of life, how does that get applied to religion? Well, or even cultures. People will apply the evolutionary idea to cultures, where you have first cultures, the lower form or the less developed form of a culture, whatever you think that is. These were white guys from Europe, so their standard was kind of their culture. So if anything didn't really come up to snuff, didn't impress them, didn't seem to be as equivalent as European culture, then it was primitive. But if it impressed them, like you go to India and you see all these fabulous buildings, huge buildings, and then that's a civilization, because that's like us. They have schools and great temples and stuff like that. Or China, great buildings and art, architectural project. So that's like Europe. So that's advanced. But the people living in huts, who are still hunters gatherers and don't have metal and stuff like, they're still using stones. That's not how we do it. Or at least that's not how we do it in the city of London. Maybe the farmers out in the countryside, the boonies, the bumpkins do that. So that's primitive, So there was racism and all sorts of prejudice in how they categorized primitive societies from more advanced civilizations, usually by if they looked the same to them or similar to the society they knew. Although I shouldn't be negative about it, because I think, we all kind of look for the similarities of what we know. They weren't necessarily like, oh, because they're not Europeans, they're beneath us. They're just, or this is our, we're going to judge them by the standard of Europe. What other standard were they going to judge them by? They didn't know these other cultures, so they want some standard. So you apply that to culture. Culture evolves from a lower form to more sophisticated forms, higher levels. Religion as well. Applied to religion. Religion, the lowest form of religion was magic, in their view. Find magic everywhere. And because they found it in primitive societies, they thought, of course, this proves our point. Magic. They're primitive societies, and they have all sorts of little magic stuff, you pray to the god, you have little amulets and little charms and all sorts of little things that you infuse with the power of a god or a spirit. So it gives you good luck and health, or finds you a husband or a wife, or, makes you pregnant so you have children, or healthy children, your children pregnant, all sorts of things. That's the lowest form. And then religion is once you have organized religion, that's kind of like a higher form where you're starting to use more rational, you have people kind of rationalistically thinking about religion and developing the kind of primitive magic into more of a systematic idea. But the highest level of religion should really be replaced by science. That was their assumption. The evolutionary scale, once human beings reached modern science, which they had, Ms. Horan, with the Enlightenment, was the assumption. You didn't really need religion anymore, just like religion didn't need magic when religion developed. Problem is that if you actually study human cultures, where do you draw the line between religion and magic? Because religion and magic's all over the place, even in very sophisticated, where apparently are very sophisticated and developed religions, like, say, Hinduism. There was more of a prejudice based on, what they thought how societies evolved. And everyone did this. Now, if the history of sociology, that you could study the evolution of society. So there has to be a basic form of society, and then it will develop naturally. It will evolve into this, and then ultimately into this, and you can predict. Okay, that's the whole idea of, say, Marxism and communism. But Marx's idea, and also Engels, the political theorist, economist, was that, his whole idea was that society, the basic society was based on this. And then you could chart out how a society would ultimately develop into a commune where everyone from the basic society, where it's my stuff, I have my stuff and it ain't your stuff. So keep away. If you want my stuff, you got to pay me for it, or do a job for me, do something like that. But then eventually, you'll get to socialism, where there's sharing, but then communism is the ultimate, which is everything's held in common. There is no private property at all. There's no my stuff or your stuff. It's all ours. And this was based on an evolutionary worldview, which people still debate whether it really works. I mean, it works, whether that's valid, apply, but they wanted to apply evolution to everything. The final influence was agnosticism. Agnosticism, not atheism, wasn't necessarily direct denial of God or a God or gods, okay? But you're not making any judgment on it, okay? You're without knowledge. Not gnosko means to know, okay? And you see even they're related. I mean, it's gnosko, know, which is, this K is now silent. If we were speaking English 500 years ago, it would have said to know. I know what I am talking about. A boot, probably. Gnosko, okay? Related languages, Greek and English, Indo-European. So to not know, that the existence of an ultimate reality is really unknown and unknowable. We can't know it. So that's the assumption you make when you're studying, say, religion. You're not saying that the people's spirits don't exist, or if it's some alien cult, that there are no aliens, you don't think there are any aliens, or there's no God or something like that. But you are agnostic about it. You're not, that's not a question of whether there's a supernatural or not. You're simply describing the experience of what you're seeing and what these people tell you they believe. Okay, I mean, I would probably call that bracketing in another term. I don't think you necessarily have. I mean, you have to be careful because you don't. If you really are, well, anyways, you don't want to. Whatever. You get my point. You understand my point? I don't think I have to beat a dead horse. You could still believe that there's a God or whatever. It's just in your attitude, you're not assuming the existence or the non-existence of an ultimate being or an ultimate reality. You're just describing what you're observing. So to recap, religious studies, what are the influences or what are the assumptions of the academic study of religion? First, there's no supernatural or invisible non-material world or realm of existence. There are no supernatural, invisible, non-material beings. At least we're not assuming so. Only natural physicalistic explanations of religious phenomena are valid. Okay, so, if a statue, like, for example, I saw this on YouTube years and years ago, there a bunch of Hindus were going nuts because, a statue of Ganesh. Did I mention Ganesh? Did I just tell you about the story of Ganesh, the elephant kid? Yeah. Apparently there's, very popular god, little baby elephant-headed god. And one of the statues at a temple somewhere was drinking milk from a spoon. So and they showed the video, the person offered a spoonful of milk to feed the idol. And you could see it was actually getting smaller, the milk on the spoon. And they put this on YouTube, and apparently other people ran to their Hindu temples and did the same thing, and it happened there too, that some people said. So it was a big thing. I'm watching these videos. Now, as a religious studies scholar, no, I'm a supernaturalist. I don't have any problem necessarily accepting that it could be some supernatural thing going on. Whether that's good or bad is another question for me. But I would also look for a natural explanation first, even if it were happening at like a Catholic church. If like I'm going to my church and they're saying, "Oh yeah, the icon of the Virgin Mary started crying last week," and you'll look at the picture of Mary and this Mother of Christ, and yeah, I can see water coming down from her eyes. All right, maybe that's supernatural, but maybe it's a broken pipe behind the wall. You got to look. So jump to the conclusion. I look for natural explanations too. But in religious studies, that's your assumption, that there's always a physicalistic, or there's always a natural explanation. It couldn't just be something, the sacred doesn't really exist. We perceive it to exist. Even if you can't explain it, we just don't know yet. Which to me is kind of like they call that, when people explain things like, well, when we can't explain something in science, they say, well, God did that. That must be God, And they call it God of the gaps. Wherever there are gaps in science, that's something science can't explain, you always kind of like insert God here. Well, that must be God. That must be God. That must be God. I think this is science of the gaps. When science can't explain something, especially supernatural, something really weird or unusual, something that we would say sacred, it seems to be an intervention of the sacred. Well, science can explain that. We just don't know what it is yet. Eventually, we'll know. Okay. How is that not the same argument that people make with God? So, things have to be personally observed. Okay, there's not an assumption that there is an invisible reality that people can appeal to. Even though there are invisible realities. I mean, which is the weird thing. Because remember, a lot of these assumptions are coming from the Enlightenment period, and some of these are growing kind of moldy. Maybe religious studies scholars, I'm not one, but I'm an outsider, but they might need to revise some of these things in light of because we know there are invisible realities. We know there are things that exist. Well, we think we know. There are things that exist that we absolutely cannot prove. like dark matter, dark energy. If you ask any astronomer about it, oh yeah, they'll talk your ear off about, what's dark? Okay, Professor so and so, explain to me what dark matter, dark energy. Oh yeah, well, we think most of the universe is that. Yeah, yeah, most of the universe is dark matter and dark energy. Is this thing? Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, well, what is it? Well, we don't know. Well, how do we know it exists? Well, we can't prove it exists. We can't see it. We can't observe it. It's not observable. By nature, it's not observable. That's why I call it dark matter and dark energy. It's not observable by any technology that we know of. But, Ms. I know who you are. I know who you are. Wait a second. Ms. Robbins? No, Miss Howerton. Miss Howerton, right? Okay. Where did you come from? I didn't realize you were here. I'm sorry, Miss Howerton. But we know it from its effects. There are things that we can't explain in the universe that seem to be there seem to be things like the man behind the the man behind the curtain, something that material things in the universe work in certain ways that the only explanation is there has to be something there doing it. We just can't see it, so we call it dark matter and dark energy. And we can't prove it because it's, as I said, it's unobservable. But we can observe effects. We can see it kind of poking at other stuff. What's doing that to that thing, There must be something there. So we just gave them a name to it. So there are things, even in the physical, material world, that are completely invisible realities and unknowable realities. Forget about dark matter and dark energy. The universe itself, it's infinitely expanding at an ever greater pace. So the outskirts of our universe, if there are outskirts, I'm not sure we even have outskirts, whatever the universe is expanding into, is always going faster and exponentially faster and faster and faster. So things are getting away from us, going away from us at ever greater speeds. So the universe itself, forget about gods or whatever, the natural universe, the material universe, is itself unknowable because it's already exceeding the limits of what we can even see of it. It's going so much faster that eventually our skies will be dark. We'll have no stars around us because they'll be so far away and moving so fast away from us that the light coming from them will never be able ever possibly to reach us in order to see them. So how can you know a universe like that? Ever. It's unknowable. So I think some things need to be modified in this. This is my little critique. Some things, even in science, need to be maybe modified. A lot of these ideas are coming from 200 years ago when the Enlightenment was still kind of fresh and new. And these things made perfect sense. By the end of the 1800s, physicists and astronomers thought they had the whole world figured out. They knew exactly how the world worked, according to Newtonian physics. They knew what the solar system was like, and there was nothing new to learn. They really did. And then Albert Einstein was born and started publishing a few articles and blew everyone's mind. And religious belief is assumed to be a lower form of belief. Basically, religious belief was the best explanation that human beings could come up with when human beings had no better ones. And maybe you've heard this, I've heard this certainly in debates between people who are, atheists or agnostics with people who are Christians or Jews or whatever. and this, religion, and we'll hear this later when we talk, we talk about Christopher Hitchens later on in the course. We'll watch an interview where he makes exactly that same point. Religion comes from our babyhood as human beings, when we didn't know what made the planets move. We just saw things moving in the sky. The sun moved. We didn't know what to do about disease and illness. We didn't have medicine. We didn't know about germs. God bless you, Miss Cook. I'm right there with you. But I've got my little friend, Miss Cook. We didn't know. So we had to make up religion and gods to explain all these things. That was the best we could do. So yeah, magic. We come up with magic. And then we get more sophisticated magic, which we call religion. But once we start really using our reason, we'll end up with science. And religion will be something we can put on the shelf with all the magical stuff, So all your little trinkets and hoo-has and voodoo stuff, you can put your statue of the Virgin Mary or your Quran up on the shelf with those and move on because you have science. And we'll see this again. Freud, that was Freud's whole argument, the psychiatrist Freud. Religion is a mental delusion, but with psychoanalysis, which was Freud's development, his special kind of treatment for mental illness. If you did Freudian psychoanalysis, you wouldn't need religion anymore. So religious studies takes these ideas from the natural sciences. But one point I want to make and hammer away at a little bit, make clear, religious studies is not like the natural sciences. It's not like the hard science. It's not a science as most people mean it today. Okay? We mean like biology and geology and chemistry and astronomy. We usually mean things you can really see and take and you can put into a laboratory or test or run models on, okay? You can't really do that with gods, okay? But then you can't do that with human beings either. Anthropologists can go observe cultures, but how do you put a certain culture into a lab and then see what happens? Like chemistry. Okay, so let's take tribesmen from Australia and put them in a room with, I don't know, Irish people. See what happens. Leave them in there for a few years. Shake them up. See what happens. Not going to happen. Not that people haven't tried. We're going to look at later on, talk about violence. We're going to talk about a study on, kind of violence, the Stanford study, where they did try to make an experiment on people about, what happens when you say certain people are in authority and certain people are not, and how does that develop, and the relationships seem to become violent very quickly, oppressive very quickly, just because someone says you're in charge. So, and it's a controversial study because they were doing it to human beings. How else would you test that? I mean, I don't have how else would you test a theory like that? Yeah, but you can't do it to human beings. Okay, but in a chemistry class, you put inert things together, and they might explode. Well, that's okay because it's not a human being, with rights. Okay, fine. But how else are you going to test ideas like this? What happens when you put human beings in a certain situation? See what happens. Sociology, economics, religious studies. They're not the natural sciences, but they are scientific in the broad sense of science as scientia, knowledge. Okay? They are scientific in that way. Religious studies is scientific in that way. It's not scientific in the way that, as I said, chemistry or biology is scientific, or medicine. Losing you? Or medicine, or something like that. But they do kind of use the methodologies of the hard sciences for their knowledge. So if any of you do social work, you take psychology courses, or psychology students, they have to do what are called labs. They have to do laboratory studies, and they have to develop experiments, usually coming up with whatchamacallit, what do they call it? Inventories, questions that people answer. And maybe you've done this stuff. You answer the questions, and they add up all the numbers. And if it comes between a certain bunch of numbers, then yes, you are in the depressive area, or no, you're not, or whatever. And you do this stuff. But yeah, you do laboratories, just like you're a real scientist. You're not. Okay. It's more of an art because the interpretation comes into play. You have to interpret the data that you get. So it is scientific in the sense of it's giving us knowledge about something, but it's not giving us maybe the hard knowledge or sure knowledge they can get from data from a science. Numbers, usually numbers and stuff like that, or a reaction. I mean, if you put two chemicals together and you know what they are, you probably know what reaction you're going to get almost every time. Okay? But you put a bunch of people in a room and you stir the pot or something, you don't know necessarily what's going to happen. If it's a psychology experiment or something like that. Who wants to read this? This is from C.T. McIntyre. How religious studies misunderstands religion. I forget, did I give this as one of the readings? Luckily, guess what I have with me? Wait, whoa. Where are you going? Oh, okay. All right, I overstepped. Sorry, sir. Apologize. I don't know if I gave this article. I guess not. Yeah, I don't see it here. All right. Well, anyways, it's still a quote. It's a good quote from it. Who would like to read this quote from C.T. McIntyre? Yes. Thank you, Miss Brown.
Are you trying to remember my name? Okay, every time.
Yes, Miss Durant. I remembered it, but I was like only 80% sure. I mean, so I get the disapproval from them. I'm trying, Ms. Rogers. Come on. Thank you.
By behaving as a first set item, religious studies plays a trick on itself. The effect is either to privilege the tendency to reduce religions to something like merely societal, cultural, economic, psychological, social controlling, or power-driven phenomena, or to force the removal of religions to the stratosphere as otherworldly phenomena concerned with transcendent spirits, gods, and heroes. Either way, religious studies fails to see religion as a dimension of human existence and the religions as ways of life for the people who live them. Insofar as this happens, religious studies neglects or distorts the religiousness of the religions as practiced and witnessed by the people studied.
Okay, excellent. So basically, he's criticizing how in religious studies you can either go two ways. You can either say that religions are basically totally supernatural, or about gods and goddesses and spirits, things that we can't know about and really can't study or place under a microscope. So what use is it other than for believers? Or we just redefine religion. We make religion is really a cultural thing, or it's based on usually economic inequalities, but economic relationships, or it's psychology, like Freud's, religion is a wish world. We mentally can't handle the chaos of the world or our lack of control, and we want something to give us control, okay? Or religion is something used to control another control that a society might use to control people. Give them something to believe in so that they won't notice that we're running away with all the money, or we have all the power. Keep them praying in their churches and don't realize that they're, living in a totalitarian dictatorship or something. So that's what he's criticizing here. I'm not sure what his answer is. He says the religiousness of religion. Okay, what they need to I guess if they fail to see, then they need to do the opposite. They need to see that religion is a dimension of human existence, and religions are part of our ways of life for the people. Okay, I'm not sure a lot of religious studies scholars would necessarily disagree with that.
What does he mean by that?
Huh?
What does he mean by when he says like if religious studies fails to see religion as a dimension of humanity?
Well, and do I have the further? I think I have the further quote. Let's go move on then. Let's see if we get more clarity on that. Who wants to read this further quote from McIntyre? Maybe this will give us a further idea. Mr. Henry? Mr. Henry, you with me? You want to read this? Well, no, you read before, Mr. Henry. Let's see. Mr. Moon, have you read before? Oh, you have? Well, yeah. You want to do it? You have a question. Oh, Mr. Gaines. Go ahead, sir.
Huh? I didn't read. Hey, you did.
You're on, sir. No, you don't want to. All right. Well, I asked. Let's see. Mr. Lynch, you don't like to talk a lot, right? You're quiet. Okay. Mr. Saunders, you've done stuff. I know that. Ms. Park. Thank you, Ms. Park. Does that help further, Ms. Durant? Does that help further explain what he might be getting at? What do you think? What do you think you might mean, Ms. Horan? What do you think he's trying to get at? All right. Well, even I'm not sure either, but yeah. I think it was the point he's trying to make. Maybe he's objecting to the descriptiveness of religious studies. You know, instead of describing what these people are doing, asking them why it's meaningful to them. Don't just tell me that, oh, they do this and they believe this. Why does that matter to them? You agree, disagree, you think I'm on something, not on something? What do you think about this? You guys, you agree with me or with my interpretation or? Right. What do you think?
And based off the highlighted portions, I think what he's trying to say is it's hard to grasp one idea as a main concept. Like in religion as a whole, there's like it says at the bottom, people shape their ways of life in which they regard as basic and ultimate.
Mm-hmm.
So it kind of comes down to personal bias and how they see certain things.
Okay. Right. How do they, live the religion? I mean, if you're making all of the, because I guess maybe part of his problem is that from what I've told you, all of the assumptions that are made, that a religious studies scholar is kind of coming to the study with, agnosticism, materialism, et cetera, so forth. That's not what religion's about, a lot of religions. That doesn't, so I guess maybe we're saying it doesn't that kind of distort what you're studying? It's like, I guess, if you're, I don't know, a physician who doesn't believe in germs or bacteria, you don't think they exist. So isn't that going to affect how you might study sickness or illness or treat it? Might distort your view of it, or at least influence it, right? Tell parents whether they need vaccines or not need vaccines, or person wants an antibiotic. You need an antibiotic for it. Oh, kill the germ. What germs? Mr. Johnson is like, there's no germs. What are you talking about? Not, I'm trying, Jasmine. I'm trying. Not even a smile. Little. Alrighty. I don't know. I mean, you're right, Ms. Horan. I'm not exactly sure what he's getting at either. I think that's might be what he's getting at. That if you're coming at it from all these non-religious, I mean, the religious people don't assume that the world is just material, unless the religion does. Some religions do. But they are not, it's certainly not agnostic. I think they can know that there's another reality that's full of gods and spirits that they can interact with. But if you're coming at it from that perspective, that, well, these things don't really, does that kind of, already, distort how you're going to study the subject? I mean, literature. If you don't think that words mean anything, if that's your assumption, that words are simply a creation of your mind or your culture or whatever, then you can read a book any way you want to read it. And it doesn't mean necessarily anything. Now, I'm not making this up because I don't know if it's still kind of, I shouldn't say that. It was a fad called postmodernism in literature. And yeah, I mean, I think people realized it meant, well, the death of literature, because, how do you communicate anything? Here we're in sacred writings, talking about writing. How do you communicate something? I mean, writing is about communication. So if you tell me that I'm going to write a book, but the reader can understand it in completely different ways, because words can mean anything that a person wants them to mean, which was the theory of postmodernism. There's no objectivity. It's all subjectivity. Okay? There's no object out there that the subject is observing and analyzing. It's all subjectivity. So if the subject says, this is what it is, that's what it is. I don't know if this is still big in literature and stuff like that, but it was for a while. It distorts, if that's how you're going to go at it, your view. I think that's what he's getting at, your view. And the same thing with religion. If you're already coming at it from a view of, not saying you have to believe the religion in order to study it, but that this is all fantasy and wish world thinking and stuff like that. And it's really just, or it's people's response to economic injustice or oppression and blah, 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 which might be part of it. But that's the basis. You're already defined, and that's not how the people would define their religious beliefs, or you're not even asking them how they. It might be a distortion. So you just want to be aware of it. How could this have a consequence for violence? Yes, we always got to get to the pain. The violence, Ms. Colonna, because that's what it's about. Religion and violence. I promised you violence, and we got to get some violence worked in here. Well, if people feel misunderstood or misrepresented, you don't really understand us, or you're not telling how we really are. You keep saying, let's say, for example, I'm a Muslim and I experience Islam as this enriching part of my life, which makes me feel like it establishes a relationship with the one God. I feel at peace with humanity and stuff like that. And I think it is a religion of peace and stuff like that. But when I look at people studying my religion or talking about it, it's a religion of violence and suicide bombers and killing people and, keeping women down and oppressed. And that might piss me off. If people feel like their religiousness is being denigrated or manipulated, we have to develop this. This was the big thing 20 years ago, to develop a moderate Islam. in response to the extreme Islam. Well, who's saying that my version of Islam or whatever version of Islam is extreme? Whose standard is that? A lot of times it seems to be, doesn't it? Doesn't seem to be the people in Saudi Arabia who most people would say hold a form of extreme Islam, but we don't want them to define it, but it's usually the West. Western scholars looking out. We want the Islamic scholars to come to the conclusions that we have made about religion and its influence on life. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. Understand that, right? I'm not defending anything, but I'm just giving an example. If I were a Muslim man or a Muslim woman, that would piss me off, I feel manipulated. Now you're trying to change my religion to what you want it, so it accepts all your Western values that I maybe don't accept. Why do I have to accept free speech or the equality of women? Uh-oh, I stepped in that one, Miss Rogers. Okay, moving on. You don't mess with the ladies. No, but I'm just saying, we assume certain things in Western society that we can't assume that people in other cultures necessarily do. Doesn't necessarily make them bad people. Might be wrong, we might think, according to our standards, but do I have the right then to try and, if I'm trying to change their religion to what I want them to think like I do? Even if it's a good thing, I love the equality of women. But if I'm going in there, like we went into Afghanistan and opened schools for girls, that's a good thing. But the Taliban didn't see it that way because it violated some of their religious and cultural principles. And I'm not saying it was a bad thing, but what I'm saying is it was imposed. It wasn't like explained. You understand what I'm saying? It was soldiers we sent soldiers to their country, overthrew the government that was there, established our own government, which is not there anymore because the Taliban won, but anyways. And we started establishing our own values, thinking that just by imposing it, because it was right, the religion would change, the culture would change. Didn't. In fact, the Taliban got stronger and eventually kicked us out. Okay, so yeah, how could this tie into, how people study religion tie into violence? If people feel like they're not being understood properly or being misrepresented, the religion's being misrepresented, yeah, I can see people getting angry, even violent over it, because it's something they care about. Something they care about. Okay. Wait a second. Oh, when I get to that. Well, that's phenomenology. We're going to first start with the philosophical, a philosophical study of religion, how it's philosophically looked at, the phenomenon of religion. But I'm not going to get into that now. I'll save that for Thursday. God bless you all. You may go. I know some of you have already checked out, but now you can really go. My people.
So,
See you, Miss Krause.
Not even a goodbye.
Huh?
Not even a goodbye.
I know.
have a good one.
You too, Miss.
Yeah.
See you, Miss. Have a good day, sir. Have a good day, Miss. See you, Mr. Dobson.